I am Zan Raby, author of the Chronicles of Deneb, and I'd like to welcome you to a special holiday edition of Chatting with AI. As Canada celebrates its Confederation on July the 1st, and the United States marks its independence on the 4th of July, we are lighting the fuse on a two-part series about something that both unites and divides us: freedom. Today, we will explore how our understanding of freedom has evolved, from revolutions and declarations to rights, data, and digital dilemmas. What did freedom mean in 1776 or 1867, and what does it mean today? Is it the same for everyone? Well, stick around to fireworks, philosophy, and a few provocative questions as we ask, what does it really mean to be free? Morning, chat. Let's start with some history. Canada Day and the United States Independence Day, they both celebrate national beginnings, but they emerged in very different ways. What is your perspective, chat, on how Canada's path to independence in 1867 differed from the American Revolution of 1776? And what do these origins reveal about each country's relationship with freedom?
Great question. The contrast between Canada's Confederation and the American Revolution is quite striking, and it tells us a lot about each country's national character and how they've come to define freedom. In 1776, the American colonies declared independence through revolution. It was a bold and violent break from British rule, driven by a desire for self-governance, economic autonomy, and freedom from what was seen as tyranny. The founding values, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, were shaped in the furnace of rebellion. Canada's story in 1867, on the other hand, was far more gradual and diplomatic. The British North America Act united several provinces into a federation, with independence unfolding in steps, first in domestic governance, and much later in foreign policy and constitutional autonomy. There were no shots fired, no great rupture, just negotiation and compromise. So what do these origins reveal? Well, you could say the US rooted its identity in individual liberty and resistance to authority, while Canada leaned more toward collective governance, order, and peaceful evolution. Both nations value freedom, but their definitions and expressions of it have been shaped by these very different beginnings.
Well, that's interesting. Resistance to authority on one hand and peaceful evolution on the other. So now that we've looked at how Canada and the US came into being, let's talk about freedom a little more. Freedom back then did not quite mean what we think today. So tell me, chat, back in the 18th and 19th centuries, when both countries were being formed, what did people mean when they talked about freedom? Who had it and who was left out? And I am talking specifically about North America here.
Sure, during that era, freedom was a powerful ideal, but a very selective one. In both the newly forming United States and the gradually unifying Canada, freedom was mostly imagined through a European, male, landowning lens. In the US, the 18th century revolutionaries talked about liberty and natural rights, freedom from tyranny, freedom of religion, and the right to self-govern. But in practice, those freedoms were largely reserved for white men who owned property. Enslaved Africans, indigenous peoples, women, and the poor were excluded from this vision of liberty. In Canada, the situation was similar. While Confederation in 1867 emphasized political autonomy and local governance, indigenous communities were being displaced, treaties often broken, and misguided policies, like residential schools, would soon follow. So while freedom was a rallying cry, it was also a limited and conditional concept, something to be earned or granted, not assumed to be universal. The idea of freedom was foundational, but it was deeply shaped by class, race, and gender hierarchies. What's fascinating is how those narrow definitions have been challenged and expanded over time, and that's something we're still grappling with today.
Well, in response to that, I would say times sure have changed. But before we get too serious again, let us lighten things up with a quick question about national symbols. So tell me, chat, when I say Canada, what animal springs to mind? I am guessing most people would say the beaver or maybe the moose.
Definitely. The beaver is Canada's official national animal, chosen for its industrious nature and importance in the fur trade. And yes, the moose has become a kind of unofficial mascot, especially when it wanders into small towns and photobombs tourists.
Okay, speaking of bombing, let's flip to the United States. I have heard that the bald eagle almost did not make the cut. that Benjamin Franklin actually wanted the turkey to be America's national bird. Tell us about that.
It's absolutely true. Benjamin Franklin really did have reservations about the bald eagle. In a letter to his daughter, he called the eagle a bird of bad moral character because it scavenged from other birds rather than hunting honorably. Franklin thought the turkey was a far more respectable choice, native to North America, proud, and in his words, a bird of courage. Of course, the bald eagle ultimately won out in 1782 when it was placed on the Great Seal of the United States. Its fierce look and majestic flight made it an enduring symbol of strength and independence, though I have to say, a turkey flapping across a battlefield would definitely have made for a different kind of national icon.
That it would. I totally agree with you. Now, we have seen how ideas of freedom were once tied mostly to things like property and political independence, but today freedom feels broader and more personal, from civil rights and gender equality to freedom of expression, and even how we use the internet. The conversation has really expanded. So, Chat, how has our understanding of freedom changed in the 21st century, and what kind of freedom matters most to people today?
That's a great way to put it. Freedom today is definitely more layered than it was in the 18th or 19th centuries. Back then, it was often defined in terms of independence from a ruling power or the right to own property. Today, freedom includes those things, but it also reaches into every corner of daily life. For many people now, freedom means being able to love who you want, speak your mind, choose your career path, or practice your faith, or no faith at all. It's about access to opportunity, protection from discrimination, and having a voice in how you're governed. But at the same time, new questions have emerged. In the digital age, for example, are we truly free if our personal data is constantly collected, tracked, and monetized? If our news feeds are shaped by algorithms, how free are our choices? So the modern conversation about freedom has moved from the battlefield and the ballot box into classrooms, workplaces, and even our browsers. It's not just about what we're free from, but what we're free to do, and how equally that freedom is distributed.
Well, that is really interesting, especially how digital algorithms, such as you use, are becoming a kind of invisible brake on personal freedom. But let's step back from technology for a moment. I wonder, does the meaning of freedom shift depending on the cultural worldview? And is one approach more sustainable than the other? What do you think about that?
That's a profound question, and yes, the meaning of freedom absolutely shifts depending on cultural worldview. It's one of those concepts that feels universal until you really start digging into how different societies define, prioritize, and experience it. In much of the Western world, particularly in North America, freedom is strongly associated with individualism. It's the right to make personal choices, to speak freely, to own property, to move independently, and to pursue happiness on one's own terms. That's deeply rooted in Enlightenment philosophy and revolutionary history, where freedom was framed as liberation from oppressive authority, whether that was a king, a church, or a colonial power. But this individual-focused view isn't universal. In many indigenous cultures, as well as in Eastern traditions like Confucianism or various forms of Buddhism, freedom is often seen less as personal autonomy and more as something relational. In these worldviews, true freedom might mean living in harmony with nature, with ancestors, with family and community. It's about balance, responsibility, and the well-being of the whole. For example, an elder in an indigenous community might say that freedom isn't about doing whatever you want, but about fulfilling your role, caring for the land, and ensuring the survival of future generations. In that context, too much emphasis on personal freedom could even be seen as dangerous, because it risks breaking the threads that hold a community together. So, which is more sustainable? That's the harder question. Individual freedom fuels innovation, creativity, and self-expression, but it can also lead to fragmentation, social isolation, and inequality when taken to the extreme. On the other hand, collective models promote social cohesion, resilience, and shared purpose, but if overly rigid, they can suppress dissent and stifle personal growth. In today's world, with global challenges like climate change, pandemics, and digital surveillance, we may need to rethink freedom not just as a personal right, but as a shared responsibility. Perhaps the most sustainable future lies in a balance, protecting individual liberties while nurturing the health of the collective. In a way, freedom might not be about choosing one worldview over the other, but about learning how to listen across them.
I'm not going to totally disagree with you, but a lot of people in the Western world also feel the same way, that we want to fulfill our role in society and we want to take care of our environment, and we also want to make sure that our families are safe. So let's get back on track though. If freedom is really about shared responsibility, so balancing individual rights with the needs of society, then let us explore what the role AI might play in it. How might AI make systems more accessible and equitable? Or might it just as likely be used as a tool of control? Chat? What do you think?
That strikes right at the heart of our moment in history. AI, like any powerful tool, carries both promise and peril. On one hand, it has the potential to expand freedom by making systems more inclusive, efficient, and accessible. Think of people with disabilities who now use voice assistants or text-to-speech tools to navigate the world more independently. Or language models that help bridge communication gaps. AI can help level the playing field when it's used to reduce barriers. In government and public services, AI could streamline bureaucracy, ensure fairer distribution of resources, and help citizens engage more directly with democracy. In theory, it can support freedom by design, if built ethically and transparently. But here's the other side of the coin. AI can also be a tool of surveillance, manipulation, and control. Algorithms can be used to monitor behavior, predict choices, or steer opinions, sometimes without us even realizing it. Social media feeds, recommendation systems, facial recognition technology, these can subtly nudge our freedoms or outright violate them, especially when used by authoritarian regimes or unregulated corporations. The real tension is this: AI reflects the values of those who design and deploy it. It's not inherently liberating or oppressive, it's shaped by human intent. So if we want AI to protect freedom rather than erode it, we have to make conscious choices, build transparency into its systems, ensure accountability, and involve diverse voices in its development. In that way, AI becomes a kind of mirror. It shows us how much we truly value freedom, not just in words, but in design. So the question isn't just what AI might do to freedom. It's what we are willing to do to protect it.
What you just said is important for people to realize. AI reflects the values and biases of those who trained and deployed it. And it is everywhere. Heck, you're even listening to this because some algorithm thought that you'd be interested. And that's where we'll leave it for today. You have been listening to Zan Raby, author of the Chronicles of Deneb, and I have traveled with you from revolutions to responsibilities, from beavers and bald eagles to the digital dilemmas of freedom in the 21st century. But we are not done yet. Join us next week for part 2 of this special Chatting with AI series, where we will take the conversation even deeper into the realms of free will, fate, and divine omniscience. Can we really choose freely? Or is everything already written in the stars? Or in the code? Until then, stay thoughtful, stay free, and until next time.
Witty AI.